guys are probably expecting somebody, or were expecting somebody in a dark suit, black sunglasses, good looking and like 10 feet tall. I'm not that person. My friends and colleagues at home right now that are watching this on the internet are probably saying, get the little guy some phone books, he is standing up. So. As an FBI agent, we work a lot of different cases, a lot of interesting cases, a lot of complex cases. In 2008, I never thought, and I had about 10 years in as an FBI agent at that time, I never thought I would work a case like this. Complex case involving a lot of victims, fascinating case, historically significant case, but an absolute crazy case too. So our case is still open actually, because we have a lot of evidence to return to victims in the case and also to the toys. So I'm kind of limited in what I'm going to speak about, and I was told basically to speak about what's already been spoken about in court or in the newspapers or magazines or whatever, a lot of open source information. So I kind of have to be careful when I say that. I'm going to make it fun, I'm going to make it very entertaining, and you're going to find it very informative, I'm sure. As Mr. Whitehead spoke about, this is a picture I grabbed off of, I think, Google Images of Clementine Hunter. I'm a Louisiana native. I grew up here. I lived first 28 years of my life here. From the Baton Rouge area, I moved off. Came back to Louisiana. I was an FBI agent in New York City. Came back on a transfer to Alexandria. What I knew about Clementine Hunter from the Natchitoches area, folk artists, and everybody over my lifetime said, oh, her paintings look like kids could have painted. My wife had a friend from high school that their family's prized possession was a Clementine Hunter Senior's painting, I believe. So that's about basically what I knew about Clementine Hunter. As Mr. Whitehead spoke about, his whole story kind of starts off 1974. I was 3 years old in 1974. This is the actual photograph of the front of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans paper, New Orleans area paper, of policewoman Roma Kent, who's now a federal public defender down in the New Orleans area. And this is Detective John Morse. I actually interviewed these two individuals during my investigation of the toys. This is a famous photo. These two forgeries actually, we know where the two forgeries are up front that's being displayed. It was I think 22 forgeries they actually seized from Mr. Toye during the sting operation that the New Orleans Police Department executed back in the early 70s and seized these paintings from Mr. Toye's home and I believe from another residence. A little bit close-up shot. This is the article from the Times-Picayune. Interesting, the article on the right is another article from 1969 where it names Mr. Toye as a New Orleans artist who had several paintings damaged and stolen from his home, and this is in 1969. So it names Mr. Toye as an artist at least by 1969. This is the earliest article I could find on Mr. Toye. These are some of his early forgeries. Some of the two at the top left and in the middle, the two that were on the front of the New Times-Picayune newspaper article. I was actually fortunate enough to find some of his victims from the early NOPD case still living in the New Orleans area, and I was able to get more current photos of these same forgeries. These people still had them all these years, and actually still had some documentation to go along with them. So that's some of the early forgeries. I was fortunate enough to have a sergeant with the New Orleans Police Department called him up and said, look, somebody gave me your name. I need a favor. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. But I need a favor from the New Orleans Police Department. I am looking for any documentation that you would have on this old fraud case involving William Toye. Lo and behold, this New Orleans Police Department sergeant, they didn't have any records, but the district attorney's office in New Orleans actually still had some records on microfilm. I was able to get a prosecutive report from the district attorney's office basically laid out the entire 1970s case for me. The case was actually refused by the district attorney's office. Mr. Toye was arrested by the New Orleans Police Department, but he was never prosecuted for any type of crime related to selling and putting out these Clementine Hunter forgeries in the early 1970s. And there were several victims back then. Lo and behold, Google the internet, Google search on Google patents. William J. Toye invented an internal combustion engine. You can get on Google, do a Google search on the patents. There's a William Toye. Same address as Mr. Toye is using in the New Orleans Police Department case. Apparently he developed this patent for this engine, and I think maybe Datsun at the time had actually bought the rights to it. I'm not really sure whatever happened with that. He's an inventor too. Found this article from 1991, Times-Picayune, Indiana. W. Jeffrey Toye has incorporated the name New Orleans Symphony Chamber Orchestra Society. By Mr. Toye trying to revitalize the New Orleans Symphony at that time. Notice the name, W. Jeffrey Toye. Fast forward 1996. There was a small auction house called the Louisiana Auction Exchange in Baton Rouge. I believe this was off of Florida Boulevard at the time. That came under investigation by the FBI at the time. This is before I was even an FBI agent. Ronald Causey and Sandra Causey were the owners of that auction house. And there were several allegations made against the auction house and the Causeys concerning forgeries that they were selling from the auction house. So this is something I grabbed off the New York Times' website. This is an article out of the Baton Rouge, I think at the time it was called State Times, it's called Morning The Advocate now, about the auction house controversy regarding the sale of forgeries. The FBI is involved. They're under investigation. It's Mr. Causey and his wife. This was a painting. It was called the Toye or something. I forgot the artist, but that was one of the paintings that came into question. Same article, look who's popping up again. W. Jeffrey Toye, Mr. Toye, with this fabulous Matisse. He says he has the original Matisse. It's real according to Mr. Toye, but experts say that no, this is a forgery. Another article came out in the paper later on about the Louisiana Auction Exchange again in the Causeys. Louisiana Auction Exchange advertises in a national art magazine for an upcoming auction, and there's a Degas. What the FBI didn't focus in on at the time was who's giving the auction house these forgeries. Well, if you looked in one of their catalogs, there's a William Toye listed as provenance for several of these paintings. These are two Degas, which at the time were identified as forgeries that were linked to Mr. Toye. Raoul, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Duffy. I don't know much about art, people. So bear with me. A wine gris. This was a Charles Birchfield, I believe. Forgeries. Reginald Marsh, forgeries. John Marion, and I forgot the one of the artists on the right. But the FBI had consulted with several prominent dealers and people knowledgeable in the art field on these paintings way back when, and everybody was like, no, these are forgeries. This was Charles Birchfield, I believe. We know where this one's at. Pretty little Renoir that Mr. Toye did. It's with an Arkansas owner right now. These are images out of one of the catalogs that I was able to get an agent in New York who is on the FBI's National Art Crime Team, had retained these catalogs for whatever reason. I was able to get a couple original catalogs from this agent up in New York City. There's some Georgia key forgeries in there. We know where at least 2 of those are. All forgeries linked to Mr. Toye. This is a list I came up with. Hopefully you can see it with the blue background. These are all the artists that I was able to link Mr. Toye to creating forgeries for. And again, I don't collect art. I have, like, you know, one original piece that a friend of mine, a watercolor friend of mine did, a friend of mine in Alexandria. But I do know these are some very prominent artists, you know, and these, you know, what talent, I guess you could say, by Mr. Toye. I don't know. But he can create a lot of different paintings. Again, this is one of my favorite photos of Mr. Toye with this Matisse. The whole FBI case from the 1990s kind of centered around this Matisse. And I thought when I started this case, well, wouldn't it be great to get a hold of that thing? Use that as evidence one day? This is the cover of one of the catalogs I was talking about. And as you can see, it was listed right here, lot number 58, the title and dimensions, the estimated take on it at auction. Provenance, Edicombe Collection, Baltimore, Alonzo Lansford, New Orleans, Doctor. Mr. Toye's a doctor now. Dr. and Mrs. W. Jeffrey Toye. W. Jeffrey Toye, New Orleans. A little bit better photo of that same Matisse forgery. I was later able to find a copy of an appraisal for this same painting by this New York dealer at the time. This 1970. This appraisal was dated 1970. Appraised at $175,000. This is a letter written on, hard to see, this is a letter written on the letterhead of Alonzo Lansford, who was he's deceased now, but he was the director of the Delgado, at the time, the Delgado Museum in the 70s in New Orleans. It became known as the New Orleans Museum of Art. Somebody's paging me right now, probably saying, get a phone book. And it references the same painting right here. A little note written right here by Mr. Toye. We'll talk about that later. We found that painting. It was with the Michigan Art Dealer. This dealer had purchased it from Mr. Toye with several other pieces of art. Had sent Mr. Toye a lot of money in advance. This dealer was going to sell these pieces of art for Mr. Toye and then, make a commission on that. But the dealer was having some problem getting these things authenticated for some reason. I don't know. But there's me in our office with that Matisse. It is now seized as FBI evidence. We're not going to keep it. We're going to give it back and ask that the person who actually paid for it does the right thing and marks it as a forgery and it's never to be sold again. This is an article from Forbes magazine, 1997. There's that famous Matisse forgery again, talking about the Louisiana auction exchange. An article written by a Louisiana journalist here for the Maine Antiques Digest, talking about the causes of the controversy with the Louisiana auction exchange. There's one of those Toye forgeries. And actually they had a copy of an evidence receipt or evidence sticker from the back of this forgery right here. So, 1990s, Mr. Toye's name is coming back up. There's a lot of controversy, with that auction house, and they put 2 and 2 together, and, Mr. Toye is consigning a lot of these forgeries to this auction house. Fast forward, 1999, 2000, never could come up with an exact date for the prosecutors of the court, but this new group of Clementine Hunter forgeries start popping up. People start buying a lot of these forgeries from a man by the name of Robbie Lucky from here in Natchitoches. He had a store called the Carriage House. He later went to work for an antiques dealer down in New Orleans. something was different about these particular paintings, these forgeries that were coming up. Something about the eyes of the characters in the paintings. So I'm told. I couldn't, if someone walked in here with a real one, a real Clementine Hunter and a fake one, I couldn't tell. Probably pick out the Toye forgery though. But I'm no expert on any of that. Signatures were pretty consistent. The little, where the H slash, the bar on the H kind of went into the center of the backwards C. New forgeries kind of had a consistency to the signature. Very clean signature, very precise. These boards that these I'd say 99% of these new forgeries, new group of forgeries, was this corrugated type press wood, which I think I had an ATF agent in a lab describe to me the process how they manufacture this stuff, and there's like a screen that they set it on and it's pressed together. It's like a particle type board. You find it on a lot of furniture, older furniture, and I guess some new furniture too, as a fake. If you don't want to use solid wood backing, you would put this on it, put some kind of finish on it. So a lot of these forgeries, roughly I guess 99% of these new Clementine Hunter forgeries were all painted on this board in odd sizes. So I'm told Clementine Hunter, painted on a lot of different things, but her canvases and the board roughly, about the same size, not always, but very odd sizes, sometimes large, elongated, large rectangular boards that these new forgeries were painted on. Another aspect of these forgeries, a lot of stuff going on in these forgeries. Miss Clementine Hunter would paint a baptism scene here, or a wash day scene, or an angel scene, or a cotton picking a mule, pulling a cart of cotton, but never really would combine all these different images all in one. It's very large, odd size right here. Here's one with a funeral and a wedding and a baptism all in one, just combining a lot of known themes for Clementine Hunter, but all on one canvas, all on one board. Kind of odd. If it was real, it would be an impressive, piece to own. As Mr. Whitehead talked about, Clementine Hunter didn't paint a lot of Christmas tree paintings, but beginning around that 1999-2000 mark, there were Christmas trees floating all over the place. And they all kind of look the same, don't they? June 2008, I'm approached by the U.S. Attorney's Office, the prosecutor, Alec Van Hook. He was just an assistant U.S. attorney at the time, not a supervisor at the time, I don't believe. He said, "Randy, I got a case for you." I'm like, "Oh, great, what is it?" And he tells me about this case involving Clementine Hunter forgeries. And I was telling somebody earlier today, I like to watch Antiques Roadshow. Maybe that's why he picked me, I don't know. But we started the FBI opens its investigation, and the subject of the investigation the subjects are William J. Toye, his wife Beryl Ann Toye of Baton Rouge, and then Robert E. Lucky Jr., who was of New Orleans at this time. So we open up the case, we don't advertise it. We start trying to talk to people, but without trying to stir a lot of publicity or get the word out that, hey, the FBI is looking, because I'm looking to do some proactive stuff in the investigation. And contacted a museum up in Minnesota, said, "Hey, I hear you got a donation of several paintings from a patron. Can you send me some photos? I'd like to take a look at them." And we find there's a number of forgeries in their collection. And lo and behold, the story breaks. So this is February 4th, 2009. Not, within a short period of time after we opened up our case, I started getting a little nervous about what I could do at this point as far as getting evidence for the prosecutors to show criminal intent and to develop the case into something that could be indicted. So I'm a little nervous at this time. One part of this case that we knew from the very beginning, myself and the prosecutors, is that we had to rely on some good forensics. We couldn't just take one or two people's word that, oh, these things are fakes, just because I've seen a lot of them over my lifetime. We needed to have some forensic analysis performed on forgeries to be able to show it. Juries nowadays, I mean, everybody watches CSI on television. They kind of expect the government prosecutors to give them something besides just someone's word and someone's testimony. So we knew we needed to have some good lab work behind our investigation to prove that these things were forgeries. And I knew of Miss Mary Striegel. I knew where she worked. I didn't really know what the National Center for Preservation, Technology, and Training did, but I knew, hey, it's a lab. It's 45 minutes away. I don't have to drive a lot, and it's going to be a controlled environment. Let me give them a call, and they're in Natchitoches, and I'm sure they do their share of work around here to help preserve Natchitoches Parish and Louisiana history. Let me see if they would partner up with us and give us a hand. I don't know what they're capable of, but I'm just a one-man show in Alexandria, working this case. Any help I can get from anybody, I'm doing backflips. So I give them a call, go up there, visit them, and say, hey, this is what I got. Please don't tell anybody. I'd like to get you guys somehow involved. The FBI contracts with McCrone Associates. We grab a number of forgeries that were given to us by some of the victims in the case from around the state. We also were fortunate enough to have some families here and individuals here in Natchitoches that loaned us their originals so that Mr. Joe Barabee, who's a presenter here today, next to me, could do analysis on both the forgeries and the originals. And this is a shot of me like I know what I'm looking at. There's Microsoft. It looked like a good picture, so I put it in the slide. Mr. Joe knows what he's doing now. So this is an original Xenius Clementine Hunter that was loaned to us for this process, in which we later secured as evidence when we were planning to go to trial. Fascinating what these people can do in these labs. Way over my head. Jason's church, Miss Mary Striegel helping out Mr. Barabee there, keeping track of what paintings that he's looking at prior to doing sampling and photography. They took care, very highly skilled people up here, highly trained people. I didn't have to worry about chain of custody. I didn't have to worry about them dropping it, the paintings and stuff. I didn't have to worry about them doing some shoddy job. They were very professional, which is what we always try to do in our investigations. Stay professional, stay independent, record everything. Record everything in your notes, do whatever you can, because you will be questioned later on in court about that. And juries expect you to do a good job. Fast forward a little bit. Now I work in Alexandria. I do not cover East Baton Rouge Parish. That's not one of the 9 parishes that Alexandria FBI resident agency covers. But I went to Baton Rouge and I got a search warrant. I had a federal magistrate there sign a search warrant for a residence on Key Drive in Baton Rouge, home of Mr. and Mrs. William Toye. September 30th, 2009. I'll always remember that day. This is the Toye house in Baton Rouge. Kind of grown up shrubbery, kind of hard to see. That's it from the side. Someone told me at one time that Mrs. Toye thought it was an English garden. I don't know. We execute a search warrant on the Toye home. This is a picture of Mr. Toye shops in his home. Sprawn about all in there, artist supplies, tools, photographs. Here's another shot. Paints, paint tubes, paint containers. Stuff just, as a search team member, it would be a nightmare to go through this. But our agents in Baton Rouge were very professional. I had a team leader from the Baton Rouge resident agency in our office take control of the situation. He had everybody certain responsibilities and duties for the different agents that were searching the home for them to do. Again, everything is documented where we take stuff from. Everything is photographed, in place, out of place, overall photos of the residents. This is a photo we got snapped off of a memory card that came out of the Toye's home. Cats all over the place. I don't think I've ever been to a house where there were that many cats, and all of them on top of them. And who has a cat in here? I had cats. I had one cat, a couple of cats. They leave a lot of hair. Especially when you got 10 or 12 or 15 of them living with you. We found boxes of used tubes of paint and containers. We found photographs of forgeries, Clementine Hunter forgeries. A lot of documentation on art. A lot of letters, both for Clementine Hunter paintings and for fine art paintings and watercolors and drawings. Treasure trove of evidence. Some more shots of all the paints that I believe I boxed up and sent to both McCrone and Orion Analytical a few hundred paint tubes and containers. I had to individually mark each one of them. I think it was somewhere over 300 total. Various colors, various manufacturers. We also found some boards that were consistent with the boards used to paint this new group of forgeries that popped up. Now this is my opinion. But you see that little hole right there? In this board, that size? I live in an older home from the 1940s, and there was a built-in like little cabinet in one of my bathrooms in the house. That's where a little brass insert would go for a sliding door. Mr. Toye would tell me that they would go to the Salvation Army in Baton Rouge and get these boards from the Salvation Army. Well, what do you bring to Salvation Army? Furniture you don't want anymore. These are 4 or 5 forgeries, Clementine Hunter forgeries, that we seized from the Toye home that day. These 4 right here would later be given to the U.S. government as part of a plea deal with Mr. Toye. He gave this now property of the U.S. government. But these are 4 of the 5 forgeries we received from the home. These are the paintings laying on the driveway of Mr. Toye's residence. We actually had our evidence people from the New Orleans office come up and, because we knew it was going to be so much, log the evidence in as the agents came out of the house with it. Talked about these letters earlier. These are 2 letters, one from dated October 9, 1969, another January 12, 1970, for paintings that supposedly Mr. Toye bought from a man by the name of Mark Anthony of the 331 Gallery on Charter Street. Well, I verified it really wasn't Mark Anthony, it really was a 331 Gallery on Charter Street. I actually have a photograph of the building where it is now, what it looks like now. But the Toyes contended that they bought everything from Clementine Hunter directly on numerous trips to Melrose in the late 60s, 1970s. So there's 2 letters for paintings that they supposedly purchased. We found letters on Mr. Alonzo Lansford Conservation Studios from the 60s, 70s. As an everyday guy, supposedly Mr. Toye, purchased several works from Mr. Lansford, supposedly bought from Mr. Lansford. Well, lo and behold, out of all the letters we found, that's the same letter. One's got a signature and one does not. Imagine that. Mr. Toye would tell me later that that day that he made up these letters. But if there was any doubt that somebody was forging signatures and creating false provenance, I'm no attorney, defense, or prosecutor, but if I was, I'd have a hard time if I was a defense attorney trying to get over that. That's just my opinion. So I got all these letters, all these copies, one original, I believe, from some non-significant pieces of art Mr. Toye apparently purchased from this 331 gallery in Mark Anthony. So I packaged up numerous letters, scanned them first, but packaged up numerous letters, sent them to the FBI laboratory in Quantico and said, hey, this is what kind of case I have. This is what I would need to prove. Can you do some kind of handwriting analysis, some kind of forensic work on these letters to see, you know, if these things are fake? I got the subject telling me, yeah, he created them, but I just want to take his word for him, you know. I don't know whether that confession is going to get thrown out in court later on for whatever crazy reason the defense can come up with. But, you know, our lab, amongst other things, found that 21 of the several letters that I sent them, I think it was like 40 some odd, 50 some odd letters, 21 were typed in this Regency 10 style. And these letters are dated from the 60s and early 70s. This type was not even invented at that time. Again, if I was a defense attorney, I think I'd have a hard time trying to overcome that in court. That's just me. So, you know, from an investigator's standpoint, and I think like a prosecutor sometimes too, because I have to give prosecutors evidence to prosecute cases. That's pretty good evidence, in my opinion. Well, Maine Antiques Digest breaks a story, not too number of weeks after our search, but they break the story about FBI's investigating Clementine Hunters in Baton Rouge and around the state. And here's William Toye. He's at the center of the investigation. Nice article by Ms. Ruth Laney, journalist in Baton Rouge area, published in Maine Antiques Digest. Another thing that we found during the investigation, Mr. Toye went around. He had created a book, several pages, I think like 30 pages or something, with these little Polaroid pictures with the paintings, supposedly original Clementine Hunter painting, with the title and the dimensions. An overview of the Clementine Hunter collection, property of Mr. and Mrs. William Toye, Baton Rouge, 60 paintings in this volume. Volume 1. How many volumes are there? May never know the answer to that. Inside, it's kind of a faint scan, but inside this book here, there's this letter on 331 gallery letter, signed by Mark Anthony. Basically an appraisal of this collection of Clementine Hunter paintings supposedly owned by Mrs. Beryl Toye. I don't know if you can see. Too numerous to list individually. They got so many, the guy couldn't even put it on the paper. Signed by Mark Anthony. Now remember, we know they were creating fraudulent letters of provenance. And there's this notation right here. I don't know whether this is the magic number or not. I will never know the answer to that question. It says 438 paintings minus 60. The cover said 60 paintings in this volume equals 378 as of January 07. Could this be the magic number of Clementine forgeries? Clementine Hunter forgeries Mr. Toye created? I don't know. I don't know. This is me. I think about 20 pounds thinner. With a Uncle Tom in the Garden forgery that we seized from one of the victims in the case. Not seized, but the person voluntarily gave it to me. And to get court orders to get this stuff circulated. We secured his evidence. I think this was one that maybe McCrone might have looked at. As I started interviewing more and more people, we would find victims with just these great little collections of several forgeries. Notice the eye sizes. Kind of looks like that pressure wood that you buy on the back of a $20 mirror from Walmart, doesn't it? Same kind of size? I don't know. That's me with 3 forgeries that would later be very significant, I'm going to talk about. That's me also attempting to grow a mustache, goatee, and beard at the time. I'm gaining a little weight there too. Again, there's a Clementine Hunter forgery, a victim in Baton Rouge. Again, eye sizes, same dizziness, all consistent with that new group of forgeries we're looking like. This is my personal favorite out of all the Toye forgeries, Clementine Hunter forgeries. This was the only one that we could find, that I found, that resembled the justice system. And this painting is almost an exact copy out of the, I think it's James Wilson's book on Clementine Hunter works. It's almost an exact copy. But this is my favorite one. It's a forgery. It's my favorite one out of the case because it represents some justice. I don't know where Clementine Hunter would have went to court around here, but you know, the judge is a woman. And if you knew the story, she always portrayed the female figures as the more dominant ones in her pictures. So I'm told. We also found where Mr. Toye's forgeries were consigned to some well-known auction houses around the country and displayed in magazines, and they're sold. These 3 were sold. Kind of was beyond our investigation as to who they were sold to. I didn't get that information, but they're out there in private hands in a private collection somewhere. I don't know where. Could be out of the country. I don't know. They'll pop up one day, I'm sure. Again, an eye size. There's a couple more forgeries here, consigned to an auction house, sold at auction. I threw this slide in here, and Mr. Whitehead kind of talked about the one story that I put as the very first one. Mr. Lucky, and this is all, I mean, I testified to this in court. If any of you guys would have been in court, you would have heard, you know, these stories and stuff, you know, heard me talk about it. Mr. Lucky gave several of his customers various stories as to where these paintings were coming from. These paintings turned out to be forgeries. But he would give these colorful stories about, they never came from the toys because people knew the name Toye. But they would always come up with something. And in the sentencing from Mr. Lucky, Mr. Van Hook went through these stories in open court in front of the judge as part of his argument for sentencing. Special Lady Mrs. W.H. Spaulding. Well, Spaulding is Mrs. Toye's maiden name. He came from a woman named Judy from Natchitoches, along with her mother, both these paintings from Hunter. Judy lived in Texas now, and she was getting a divorce from her dentist husband and needed the money, so she was selling her paintings. Lady in Mississippi needed to sell her paintings for tax purposes. Woman in Natchitoches needed to sell them because she was moving. Widow needed to sell these paintings to raise money. Very colorful stories. All lies. I talked about that painting with me attempting to grow up, that slide with me attempting to grow a beard, and the 3 paintings I was holding. We had one very smart victim, female victim in Texas, that bought several forgeries, Toye forgeries from Mr. Lucky in early 2000s, and found out that they were fakes. Contacted an attorney to try to get her money back. Come short of suing Mr. Lucky, but through her attorney, she was able to get refunds on her purchases and get reimbursements. She was very smart in that prior to sending these paintings back to Mr. Lucky after she got her money from him, she would put her initials and his name and a date on the back of these paintings in permanent marker-like and would send them back. Through our investigation, we were able, I believe we recovered seized everyone that she returned that were later resold by Mr. Lucky to another victim, sometimes to 2 victims, after he had been told that they were forgeries twice. And when I finally laid hands on them, 3 of which were here in Alexandria, and I did this in front of the victim, I took out my pocket knife and I said, I want you to watch me do this, because I believe there's something on the back of here that you're going to find interesting, and I'll explain why it's interesting. So I cut open the little blue paper on the back, thinking I'm going to find initials and the date. Well, I didn't. I found this. And from an investigative standpoint, this is even better, because this shows that Mr. Lucky was trying to hide something. This shows intent to defraud, in my opinion, or whatever that's worth. And this was from a Zinnias in a Banana Boat. It was kind of a famous painting in this case, and it was named in the indictment. But we found the notation, the provenance, the paper trail had been destroyed. There was only one person who could have destroyed it. So, in February of 2010, Mr. Toye, Mrs. Toye, and Robbie Lucky were indicted by a federal grand jury in Shreveport. This is the press release, for conspiracy, 2 or more people involved in the criminal act, and a number of counts of mail fraud. Also, the Westmont Museum, who housed these 5 forgeries, but I think this is just kind of unique. They put this little flyer out to the public talking about the FBI contacting them, and they named some forgeries at the museum. They didn't know they were forgeries until I called them. You know, they're victims too. Asking the public, well, what do you think? It's kind of interesting. I love this magazine. Before I even had an article about my case in it, Gardening Gun magazine. My wife and I, in 2009, I used to work in New York City. We went back in December 2009 for the FBI's, I went back for the FBI's annual week-long National Art Crime Teams training. They were gracious enough to invite me so I could get that training. And I went to this little place in New York City that got a Concord Great Mint Jeweler. But there's an article written by Clementine Hunter, written by Louisiana artist, author John Ed Bradley from the New Orleans area. I also played football for LSU. Called The Talented Mr. Toye. There's Mr. Toye with one of his cats. I think this might have been the one named Heebie-Jeebie that became famous. Mr. Toye claimed in an article that the FBI killed his cat, ran over it, left the body in the street. Mr. Toye would later tell me that, no, Heebie's alive and well, living with the neighbor. He's doing better. This is a nice little, somebody help me, it's a Monet. But it's, what's the famous painting? It's a copy of a famous painting. I forgot the name of it. Something. There you go. Mr. Toye in the article, it's either Mr. or Mrs. Toye said, nobody can do a Monet like Mr. Toye. Again, guys, very interesting, very complex, not an easy case to investigate or prosecute, but crazy. After this, we're going to break. I'm going to let Mr. Barabee go. I don't know if I ran into my time, past my time or not, but I wanted you guys, I got this clip from WAFB, CBS affiliate in Baton Rouge, where you could actually see and hear Mr. Toye talking. It's kind of funny when you find out about what happens with the case, but we're going to break after this. And hopefully Murphy's Law won't hit.
And at George sells, the real things are worth thousands of dollars.
But tonight, 3 people are accused of selling fake Clementine Hunter paintings to unsuspecting customers. William and Beryl Ann Toye, along with a 3rd man, face a federal indictment tonight. WAB's Paul Gates recently paid a visit to the Toye's home. He has the latest on the investigation tonight.
If the grand jury wants to go ahead, let them go.
Well, they did.
They're going to find no evidence because nothing was done.
That was 78-year-old William Toye. When I talked with him last month about paintings by Louisiana folk artist Clementine Hunter. Thursday, a grand jury did find enough evidence to indict him, his 68-year-old wife Beryl, and Robert Lucky Jr. of New Orleans. All 3 face fraud charges. A federal affidavit alleges the Toyes have been involved in selling fraudulent artworks since the 1970s. In late September, the FBI searched the Toyes' home on Keady Drive here in Baton Rouge.
They were looking for Clementine Hunters.
The feds seized dozens of items, including 4 Hunter paintings.
Beryl picked up and bought from Clementine, who has them on the fence for $25.
Clementine Hunter began painting in the 1930s and continued to paint until she died in 1988. Today's indictment charges the Toyes with defrauding collectors from 2000 to 2009 by passing off fake Clementines as the real thing. In our interview, Toye maintained he never forged her works.
The only thing that I could say is that I've never forged a Clementine, and that I have never painted a Clementine. I don't like them.
Did you ever sell a Clementine that may have been forged or
Never. Never.
The Toyes and Robert Lucky are scheduled to be arraigned March 17th. If convicted on all charges, they could face up to 20 years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. We'll keep you posted.
Very interesting. Thank you, Paul.
Very interesting, very crazy. Very crazy story. The next speaker is going to be Mr. Joe Barrett, who worked on the case. I'm going to let Mr. Church introduce him.